I just realized, like, it hit me again like a brick wall. I was like, hey, bigger isn't always better. And it's not, we don't always just have to grow because that's what you're supposed to do as a company.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications. Hey folks, welcome back and thanks for tuning in this week. This is one that I've been trying to line out for a long time, so I'm particularly stoked to bring you today's guest, Owen Gue. Owen is the founder and president of The Cycling House, one of my favorite businesses here in Missoula. And why is it one of my favorites? Well, it's because The Cycling House epitomizes two of this podcast's core themes, creativity and hustle. In particular, the origin story of The Cycling House is especially inspiring. Owen has been able to make his passion his life's work, and there's so much to learn from his path. Furthermore, Owen has developed some great wisdom about culture and growth. He has great clarity on the culture he's trying to build and has arrived at the critical and often difficult to realize notion that bigger is not necessarily better. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you will too. So let's get on with it. I bring you Owen Gue right now. Okay, so we're here today with Owen Gue. Owen, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's taken us a while to put this thing together. You
Yes.
are quite a traveler, and we'll get into all that today. But
Awesome.
owner, founder of The Cycling House, kind of a Missoula institution, but also this worldwide sort of traveling, cycling, adventure platform. I want to talk about how all that came to be, but first I want to learn a little bit more about your story. We've sort of been passing and in the endurance community here, but never really had a conversation, so excited to get into it today.
Yeah, so I grew up here in Missoula, Montana,
Right.
born and raised.
What part of town?
The west side, so out on Mullen Road, right before Kona Ranch.
Okay.
Past the golf course before. Growing up out there, the golf course wasn't out there, but just as you drop down the hill past the golf course, it's called Snowdrift Lane. So
Snowdrift
just west
Lanes.
of town.
Yeah, so does that put you like Big Sky High School? Is that
Big
your
Sky
zone?
High School.
Okay.
Yep, graduated from Big Sky. Got into bike racing. I was, our folks had us outside a lot. I was skiing, fishing, hiking, camping, and 8th grade, got really into riding bikes. My dad kind of got me into riding bikes. Before that, just out there, I don't know if you've ever been to Black Mountain, but it's kind of adjacent to Blue Mountain. And
Oh,
there's just
yeah, it's the one that's kind of logged out or burned out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. We just go ride bikes out there on the Forest Service roads or the logging roads, and but got really into riding. And by 8th grade, I was had a couple of buddies that were into it as well, and got a road bike and started actually jumping into a couple local road bike races. The riding community here was super supportive of really just anybody coming in and jumping on a bike and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm kind of
14.
thinking of how that goes when you're a young kid. I mean, most of your friends are probably playing ball sports or running track and field, and you're doing this thing that's, you're probably riding a lot with grown-ups and stuff.
Definitely. Yep. Hanging out at bike shops, somebody will invite you on one of the group rides, get to meet a few of the riders, people will take you under their wing, you get some mentors in the group. And then in high school, started hanging out with Sam Schultz, another one of our buddies, Logan Onken.
Friend of the pod.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And we just started traveling and racing bikes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was kind of one of those things in high school. I had a lot of different friends in high school.
Sure.
Didn't just hang out with one crew or, one select group of people. And so I was kind of like the weird, bike rider at Big Sky High School, but it was totally cool. And we started just kind of doing some local races around Missoula. And then as I started getting more into the sport, I started traveling into the Northwest and then a little bit into the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And by the age of 18, I went to nationals at Park City, Utah.
Okay.
And that's kind of, it just, started learning from, Sam and other riders that I would meet through the riding community and some of the older riders. And that's kind of how it just progressed. And I got really into it, really into it. And so by the age of 19, I got on a team based out of Seattle, Washington called Broadmark Capital.
Oh yeah.
And that was
guys.
that was the first real team where you get a bike and you get a travel stipend. They get to fly to different races, and so it was kind of like a dream come true. And
it's like a job.
Yeah, it was like a job,
Well,
and
kind of.
Yeah, and like in like a wonderful way.
Yeah,
and so that's kind of at that point. That's kind of how the whole cycling house concept started. But growing up here in Missoula, it was getting outside as much as possible and learning as much as possible with racing, and then also just trying to enjoy this, enjoy being in Missoula.
So you get to this point with racing, with Broadmark, traveling, and you're living that lifestyle. But at some point, I'm making some assumptions here. It's sort of, you probably see the road ahead, and you're like, well, I'm not. You probably had dreams of like racing in the Tour de France, but there's some point where like that's not happening, right?
Yeah, totally. And that was still, as a very competitive person in sports.
I mean, maybe you still have those dreams. I certainly have them. No. Like every time I get on a bike.
Those dreams are long gone, thank goodness.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you want to push yourself and see how far you can go.
Absolutely.
And that's where I was at. And that getting on that team out of Seattle was like, that was a big step to, to see, at what point is the next step.
Yeah.
And being here in Missoula, Montana, at that level, Missoula is a terrible place to be a road cyclist.
Yeah.
Because it's just
explain that to a listener.
You've got to put a ton of time on the bike in the wintertime. You've got to put in big base miles, like 5-6 hour days, just to build up this like really big endurance base. Because I was training. Sam and Logan went off to the mountain bike direction, and obviously Sam, his story is incredible. And I went the road bike direction, and I was doing a lot of road stage races, and so you just have to build up this like really big volume base endurance,
and that's
base.
Really hard to do in February, March.
Totally, and so we actually, when I was 19, the team, we had a training camp in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay.
And one of my good buddies actually here from Missoula, Montana, Evan Lawrence, he got on the team as well. And we were down there at this training camp in Tucson, and it was really cool. We stayed in one big house together. Somebody's cooking food for us. We had a guide out there on the roads, like knowing where all the good rides were. And it was just like this really cool familial atmosphere where we're just like all hanging out together. We're training together, but we were training to become, to be professional riders.
Right.
And so Evan, really good buddy of mine, he's just like total idea guy. We start kicking these ideas around, and this idea started to come together. It's like, well, we have this problem being in Montana in the wintertime. Like, that's a real problem. And so, we have to figure that out and actually get away from Missoula, Montana in the winter. And so what if we were to put something like this together that wasn't necessarily for the aspiring professional rider, but for somebody who just wants to get away and ride in the sunshine in the wintertime?
Yeah, get out of the basement,
and
away from the trainer.
Totally. And we'd put the pieces together and take them on bike rides, and, like just talking through it on a road trip and, going to another race. It's like, it sounds pretty easy and it sounds pretty great because, the objective was to train for bike racing and not have a real job.
Yeah.
That's like truly like, we did not want to have a real job because, honestly, road cyclists at that level are like probably pretty bad workers because you kind of have to be pretty lazy.
Yeah, you got to sit down or lay down. I mean, what's the Greg LeMond rule? Like, why stand when you can sit? Why sit when you can lay down? That sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, you got to kind of have to be a sloth because 5 or 6 hours are spent consumed with other activities. Yeah,
and that mentality bothered me a little bit in road cycling. Just like, but that's it. You are exhausted, and so the next winter, I actually was going here to the University of Montana.
Okay.
Did the fall semester in 2005, and Evan went down to Tucson. We rented a house. A small, like 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Invited some riders to come down, and we figured out how to cook some food.
So this was like a friends and family thing.
It was like friends and family, and I mean, it was definitely like low key, very casual.
But see if this thing works.
Let's see if this thing works, and let's try to break even and like make ends meet because we didn't have a bunch of money to like fall back on or anything. So it was like, hey, let's figure out how to make this work. And it, that first year was groups of 1s and 2s. And, I remember getting some riders, like we would probably would get booted off of a forum real quick nowadays, but we'd get on like a triathlon forum and like Denver, Colorado, and
start posting.
You want like you want. So anyway, yeah, we just had a few folks come down. The second year was the year where we had an actual camp.
Okay.
Where it was like a start date and an end date.
So before it was just show up and do your own thing out of our house. We'll do some cooking, and then it sort of becomes a curriculum.
Yeah, right? You'd like shoot us an email. You'd shoot us an email. You're like, hey, Owen and Evan, I'm gonna get in on the 18th and leave on the 23rd January. Okay. Pick me up at the airport, and we would go ride with everybody every day, and we would do the food and like all those elements. But there wasn't a ton of structure to it. That's for sure.
Sure.
Still really fun, but the second year was where we actually. It was actually Hammer Nutrition put a group of riders together, and so we had to put together like an itinerary where there's what we're going to do each day, and so to be honest, like I don't remember much of that week. It was like
it's a blur,
so incredibly hard, but I do remember like it didn't feel like many things were going right.
Uh-huh.
We ran to the grocery store like seriously 4 or 5 times a day. We had to, run to like do a late night Target run to go pick more pillows, and because I think it was 14 riders, and we just had never hosted a group like that.
Yeah.
And we just didn't know what to expect. And I think the thing that seared into my mind the most is like there was this. Have you been to Tucson?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so. Very cool place.
That's part of the deal, right? We're doing this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'll be down in a couple of weeks.
Yep. Yeah. It'll be warm at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I should switch that up and do it in the winter.
Yeah, totally. Well, there's this mountain there called Mount Lemmon. It's this beautiful climb and
legendary.
Yeah, totally legendary. And it starts at 2,500 feet and it goes up to above 8,000 feet.
Wow.
And so you go through all these you go through these biomes and microclimates, and start in the desert and you end up in a alpine forest, and it's just like incredible. And the weather was really bad this day when it was like we were scheduled to do it. And we were kind of guiding as if it was, I just grew up here in Montana. Like when you had something to go and do, if you're going to go ride up the mountain or go on a ride or whatever, you just go.
Yeah, the weather doesn't really factor in.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we were definitely trying to be good guides, but it just never really crossed our mind to like, hey, let's check the weather. Let's see what's happening. And,
well, if you guys were training for your own objectives, the weather doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't prevent you from doing a ride like that.
Right. It wasn't. Yeah, exactly. It just really wasn't a big factor. And so the weather was really bad that day.
Yeah.
And so I took a group of riders up the mountain, and we had hired Andy Schultz, Sam's brother. Mm-hmm. He was our first ever employee, and Andy was in the support car, supposed to bring all the gear up to the top of the mountain.
Yep.
And so as I'm riding up the mountain with everybody, as we're climbing elevation, it's like you can tell like every few hundred feet in elevation, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Right. And a couple of the riders, they kind of knew better. They're like, "Hey, are we good? Are we?" I'm like, "No, we're good. Andy will be up at the top. He'll have the gear, I promise." And long story short, we get up to the top, and we forgot to put fuel in the support pan.
Oh, geez.
And so Andy never made it up. And
you got a problem now.
Yeah, it started snowing, and ultimately I just, there was a little cafe there. I had everybody put some napkins under their helmets for a little bit of insulation, and we just headed down the mountain. Mm-hmm. Get back to the house, ran out of hot water. There's like all these things where it's just like, oh my gosh, like, well, we learned a hard lesson. We'll never do this again. Yeah. And the coolest thing happened at the end of that camp, though, is like a couple of the riders came up to me at the end, and I've become very close with these guys. I know them.
Sure.
Well, now they came up, they're like, "Hey, Owen," and I'm kind of just like thinking that this was like a pretty tough week for everybody.
Like your head in your hands.
Totally. Yeah. And they're like, "Hey, this was awesome. This is like the best time we've had in years. We want to know, how do we sign up for the same week next year?" Huh. And like, check in hand, like ready with a deposit. And it's not just us two, it's everybody else too. And this was a group of riders that came from all over the country. They didn't know each other. So there's a couple of Canadians, there's, some folks from New Hampshire, California, the Midwest, like all over. Different backgrounds, different ages, and they all come together. And, we're hosting them under one roof. We're eating food together, riding bikes together, and just spending this quality time like with each other. Mm-hmm. And I was just like blown away. And it was at that moment, it was, those, like that next couple of weeks, I was just like, started to really think, I was like, man, there's really something to that idea.
Yeah.
And because people really like it, like the positive feedback loop was like really pretty powerful for me. And and also I could see the business structure of it. I was like, this could actually work as a business. You know, like having 1 or 2 riders come through, it's like, not really, you know, it's not really going to work out. Yeah. But like with a big group, it can. And so that kind of was the launch of, you know, my journey on the cycling.
You know, I'm thinking about that too, how that, you know, you're in the moment, you've had this rough day on the hill.
Yeah.
And you're thinking you're probably being hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. That you screwed up all these things and you put people's you know, compromised safety and all that stuff. Reasonable thoughts to be having as a guide. Yet on the same time, like, yeah, sure, probably screwed up a few things, but you did a lot of the core things right, in the sense that you created this camaraderie and this shared experience through proximity, through suffering, through getting through something together, and that's super formative.
Yeah, without a doubt. I've now, like, reflecting on what really, like, makes me tick. I've always loved bringing people together.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what it was. And fortunately now, you know, we don't run out of it. We don't run out of gas.
You can't repeat that model.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't scale, right?
No, not at all. But that was like the 2006, 2007 season. That had a really profound impact on me. That just like that feeling of having a group together and like people actually liking something that you've been a part of and built. And 2007 was a very pivotal time in my life, like the most pivotal year in my life, I think, because I quit bike racing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 22 at the time, and
now talk about that. Like, was it you sort of tapped out competitively, or you sort of saw this other path, or was it both of them sort of going on at the same time?
It was more since like I think like 2021, 22. When I was younger, you're seeing these like huge steps forward, like these huge jumps in like your fitness and your skill at being a bike racer. Not just the fitness, but also just like the tactics of it and all this stuff. It was kind of intoxicating. You know, you see yourself like progressing almost every week when you're younger, and then you get up to the upper ranks in the U.S. and it just like gets really, really competitive, which is, you know, that's like what I was looking for, but I wasn't having the successes that I was in the younger age. And also, you know, looking back on it at 22, it sounds like, when I was 22, I quit bike racing. Like, it sounds pretty young, but actually at that point, you really need to make the jump over to Europe, or it's fine if you continue to travel around the U.S. and like, you know, do that thing. But I kind of started to look at the big picture of that lifestyle, and it didn't give me the same good feeling that it had since I was like a kid starting bike racing. I wasn't seeing the progress that I was before. And I knew that I, you know, mentally and maybe physically, like I just wasn't there to make that jump. And there's also an element of like, shoot, I'd come out here at campus and I'd go, you know, I'd be back home for like 3 days in Missoula before flying off to another race. And I'd go throw a Frisbee with my friends, and I'd be sore for like 4 days after that.
Right, because you did lateral movement or something different. Yeah,
exactly. Like,
I mean, you definitely get frail at the tip of the spear, of whether it's cycling or running or whatever endurance sport it is.
Without a doubt, and I feel like road cycling, you know, it's extreme, and and so, you know, extreme just like so one dimensional, and you know that's because that's what you have to do. But you know, that kind of bothered me. You know, I was like, shoot, I want to go hiking with friends and go, you know, backpacking and throw a Frisbee without being, you know, walking around like crippled for like 4 days. And,
right.
So all those things were kind of coming together, and I think the writing was on the wall with racing, and so it was like this beautiful thing that the cycling house was there, because I could take, instead of waking up every day thinking about, okay, what am I going to do for training, or what am I going to do for a workout, or like thinking about bike racing or whatever, I started to wake up every day just thinking about the cycling house. How can I build the cycling house? You know, what is this? And, you know, what do we want to do with this? And so that was pivotal, because, you know, I quit bike racing. It was a big decision, but at that point it wasn't that hard to make. It was like, felt so lucky to have the cycling house to step into.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but you know, cycling's got a reputation. Were you confronted with some hard choices?
You know,
and you got to, I mean, if you want to talk about this, that's fine. But I just figure like that time,
that
sort
time
of
is
at
bad.
the peak of a lot of that stuff happening. Not that it doesn't happen now or didn't happen longer ago.
Right. No, that's a great question. I wasn't. Our team culture was so good. Not like better than anybody else, but like it just that I didn't see anybody making those compromises.
Yeah.
It was definitely happening. It's so weird when like you do a race and or you knew somebody from like 6 months and you like went on a few rides with them, and then like 6 months later he gets like busted for doping. Like that was it was all just weird, and it was happening a lot. You saw it in like the over in Europe, that was like really, really big news. But even just like locally, regionally, and domestically here in the US, like you did see that. And but I never was asked to like do something like that.
Thank goodness. Just the world you're describing and sort of that inflection point in your career, it aligns with, what Tyler Hamilton wrote about in his book, and he's spoken about, is like he got to this point where like he was invited into that, secret room or that black paper bag or whatever it is to like, okay, now you're a professional and you have to act this way. Right. And I don't want to hijack the conversation with that topic, but
no, totally.
That it's heartening to hear that your team culture and your experience was just more based on, I've kind of hit where I've sort of topped out in where I'm going, and my energy is immediately kind of shifted to this other thing that I'm passionate about that's still in the same domain.
Yeah, right, exactly. And totally. Yeah, I feel so grateful that I wasn't ever asked to come into that room and be like, hey, make that decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think fortunately, when I quit bike racing, I still loved riding my bike. I raced with a lot of guys who just quit cold turkey, and they probably haven't picked up a bike since.
I know some of those guys. It's sad to see.
Yeah, it's really sad to see. Yeah. So I still was passionate about riding bikes, and in 2007, Evan and I realized that we were better friends and we were business partners.
Okay.
And so there's probably a whole nother story, but we started a coffee company. It's called 5311 Coffee. It's like total like nerdy bike.
That was
bike
you guys.
Thing. Yep.
Because you used to distribute through Hammer. I remember.
Yep.
You go onto the Hammer website, you see this 5311 Coffee.
Yeah. So after the first year of Cycling House, we realized this, all these riders liked drinking good coffee, and so we created a brand around that. And long story short, Evan was way more passionate about that and like really good at that world, and I was very passionate about the Cycling House, and so I bought him out of the Cycling House, and we remain friends to this day. But so that was at that point that year, like 2007, was really where I think the Cycling House kind of started to become what it is today. We started to, have a culture and, create the experience and really just like everything that we did was, every decision that was made was for this idea of, growing the brand or building the brand and building something that is meaningful to try to find, if we can have more of those experiences that we had with that first camp.
Yeah, so talk about that. Like you've got this kind of, that experience at the first camp that's sort of your North Star as an organization, yet it's not really something that you can replicate and scale. Like we talked about that before, but how are you now? Now you're in the driver's seat, you've made the jump, and you're in this position where you can make your passion your profession. How are you making choices with how to grow this thing? What are you saying yes to? What are you saying no to?
I think the first thing I really started to focus on was the team. Who I
team
was,
of employees.
The guys, the staff, like who I was surrounding myself with, and that's when that fall, Sam decided to come down and work next to Andy because Andy and Sam are both these professional mountain bikers, and they had to train too, and so I kind of leveraged that a little bit, talked them into coming down, and then Brendan Halpin came on, and I still remember that like this night, Brendan and I did a group mountain bike ride up in the Rattlesnake, and we went out and grabbed a beer at the Iron Horse as a group of friends.
Right. And professional triathlete at the time, still to some degree.
Yeah, just graduated from the University of Montana.
Okay.
And I didn't know Brennan that well at that time. But I knew that crew, like that triathlon, triathlon crew. It was like this amazing group. You know, you had Ben Hoffman, Lindsey Corbin, Jen Lubke, and Brendan Halp, like all like these, amazing athletes, but they were just really good people, you know, like totally humble and just like fun to be around, and just like they weren't just all about, talking about triathlon, Ironman, because it wasn't really our world, but he's out there ripping mountain bikes with us. And
I will say, like, that was one of the biggest selling points for me for the endurance community here in Missoula. I mean, I'm from the running space, but you come out here and you're going on runs with the Mike Foots and the Mike Wolfs at the time and Seth Swanson, and other places it's like so just uber self-oriented, and it's all about do your run and then go hang out in your recovery socks.
Yeah,
and
totally.
do this, that, and the other. And here it was just, you're with real people talking about real stuff, working real hard.
Yes.
But just people were people. And
Yes.
that was really refreshing. A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot Communications, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
Hi, this is Jeff Meese, media technician at the College of Business, and you're listening to A New Angle.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like I see that in the Missoula community as, in the endurance world for sure. Like that, all the runners that you're talking about, and that you see that with cycling and mountain biking and triathlon. We've produced these amazing athletes have come out of Missoula, Montana, whether it's through the university or just like, they've kind of gravitated to, we call it the center of the universe, Missoula.
It is.
And I was totally attracted to that. I was like, that's so cool. And so Brent and I are, we're having a beer down at the Iron Horse, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing next winter? This coming winter, you've graduated from the university, and because we were getting a lot of triathletes down at the cycling house. We call it the cycling house because we were cyclists, but what we realized is that was kind of that time when like triathlon, especially Ironman racing, was like going through the roof. It was just like
exploding,
a rocket ship. And so sometimes like 80% of the guests that would be at the cycling house would be triathletes. And so, Brendan was like this guy who's like totally humble, like sweet dude, and wanted to also, train for his sport. And so he came down, and Brendan's has not missed a season or really a day of the cycling house since then, the last 12 years, which is pretty incredible. Wow. So, yeah.
So you're putting together this team of just awesome people. I mean, I know a lot of the folks, and they just sort of share this spirit. And, one of the things, like if you read the materials on your website, it talks a lot about this Montana experience. How would you describe that? Like, what are your sort of guiding principles for crafting the experience for these guests?
I think that, we talk a lot about this. It's hard for me to describe sometimes, but I think that for what, like in everything that I've ever seen in the cycling house world, it's all about the people. And so that comes down to us as like the guides, the team. And those are people who truly care about the experience and truly care about the cycling house and our reputation, and just like totally there to like take care of people. And they love being outside, and they really value that. And I think in Montana, not all of our guides now are from Montana or have a Montana connection. I'd say probably 90% of us do. And the rest are really attracted to that culture, so they fit in really, really well with the cycling house like team culture. And it's kind of I think they have a can-do attitude, problem solvers, and just people that truly care and are passionate. Also share that passion about being out on a bike or a mountain bike, road bike, whatever it is. Just like sharing that experience with somebody, exercising with somebody, and then getting a lot of value and seeing somebody like that, like what you're kind of like dishing out, I guess.
The stoke, basically.
Yeah. And then the other side of that is obviously the guests. The people that come on the trips have to they make up a huge part of the experience just because they are coming from all these different places, and you see these relationships formed that are lifelong friendships sometimes. It's like, holy cow, that is really, really cool. So
yeah, and so for the first few years, I mean, you'd rent a place down there. Like, it's called the Cycling House, but it's not an actual house.
Yeah.
But recently, you guys have purchased a place down there, right? In the last few years,
we did. Yeah, we did. Yeah,
that's
that was
a huge milestone.
It was a big step. Yeah, it was a big step for us. So like for 4 years after, for the first 4 years of the Cycling House, we were only in Tucson.
Yeah.
And I can't, I always got a lot of crap from my friends back here in Montana all through the summer because I would be working on stuff, but like they're like, what are you working on? Like, you don't have to go back down there. And I can't even say what I was really working on, but I don't, sometimes I don't even know, but building the website or emailing or whatever it was at Break Espresso. But then the next trip that we ever did was San Luis Obispo, California.
Okay.
And I was like eye-opening because it was like, oh, we can do a trip in another place. And this actually...
the show on the road,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah, totally. This actually works. And we started to kind of like, look at maps and just, point at a place where we've always wanted to go and run a trip. And so that's kind of how we grew. But going back to Tucson, we're based here in Missoula, and we've been based here for 14 years. But Tucson is definitely like, such a pillar of our company because of that winter, just because of it's our origin. I think that's where we started, and so I never knew how it was ever going to work out, but that was always a dream to like have our own place with with some property, be at the right Tucson's a pretty big place, like be at the right, the right spot and really build it and like turn it into like what we ultimately want.
Yeah, I mean, you're thinking about the experience. You want the right access,
yep.
Both for guests to get there, but also to deploy for rides. Big part of the experience is food, and I want to talk about that, but like having the right facility to prepare the meals and to feed everybody in the right style. Probably finding the right place and then being able to make the commitment to it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a super big deal. And it took, I think it took 11 years to make that happen. Wow. So yeah, patience and persistence. And just like, timing was a big part of that. So
yeah. So concurrent with this sort of deeper investment in Tucson and that identity and piece of the brand, you're also now, like you said, the San Luis Obispo trip, and now you're doing all these trips to Europe and other fancy places. Talk about that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's like it's totally intoxicating when when you're building something. You have this amazing team, and you're doing it with your friends, and you just like are building these relationships with the guests. Like it was like really, really powerful. And I mean, for me, like it was addicting. It was like very addictive, and like I just I loved traveling, and I loved, bringing those groups together and also just like building something. It was like super powerful. And so, yeah, we started to try stuff in Europe. And I mean, shoot, growing up, like I never went to Europe.
Sure.
I
and you
always dreamed of it.
You didn't race there, right?
No, I never raced there. And so that's, that all of a sudden, like we're over in Europe and we're trying to figure out how to run bike trips there. And so we were actually growing a lot every year just by, kind of stamping out a new trip somewhere, bringing the right crew together, the right team, and then like, inviting our guests to come with us. And it worked. It continued to work. And I think it was in 2011, we had a trip in Mallorca, Spain.
Okay.
And very cool place for a cyclist. Also, trail running is really good there. It's just like this, amazing island in the Mediterranean. And I was here, it was like 4 days before I think we were supposed to leave for that trip. And we were riding up in the Rattlesnake. It was Sam, Brendan. It was our crew. We were up on a mountain bike ride, and a ride I've probably done 150 times, drop out, just like a nice, easy evening ride. And I had a new mountain bike and rode one section. We stop and we regroup and start catching up. And, Sam's like, hey, Owen, I think your brakes are rubbing because you're going pretty slow down this hill, kind of talking a little bit of crap. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll show you. And screw up on a corner and clip it like a millimeter of a tree and end up crashing. And as a bike racer, whenever you fall, if you realize that you're conscious and like you can move everything, you always feel for your clavicle. Just you broke that. Because I'd always see it on TV. I'd never broken a bone in my body. And in all the years of like road racing, and sure enough, like my clavicle is just like totally bust. I'm like, well, crap. I am the only one that knows, as I'm like walking out of the, through Sawmill Gulch, I'm thinking to myself, I am the only one that knows what is happening on this trip. Even like probably the riders that were coming on that trip, it's all either in my head or on pieces of paper and maybe some emails. And I just was like, it was like I just decided hiking out that we had grown to a point that it was definitely, it always felt bigger than me.
Yep.
But it was too big for me, like it was all, I realized it was all on me, and like, we're bigger than that now. Like it's more important than just you.
That's such a critical inflection point you're talking about with entrepreneurs, business owners. And most people kind of come to a lot of those choices later. They think, I can't afford to pay somebody to do this other thing. And, it's an allocation of their time choice. But in this case, it's a physical impediment to being able to do the job of leading a trip.
Yeah. And I think other, maybe smarter people or more somebody that was like a little bit, would reflect on like where things are going, maybe would have like figured this out sooner. But that's kind of always how I learned in a way. It was like you'd get hit you'd hit the brick wall and you're like, okay, well, now we need to do something about this.
The van ran out of gas.
Exactly.
I'm not going to make that mistake again.
Totally. And so, that's, I went on the trip, I got surgery, and then 36 hours after that, I was on a plane going to Europe, just because it was that, like, that's just what had to happen.
Had to do it.
But after that, that's when we started to create these real leadership positions within the cycling house. And I started to actually realize that, Brendan Halpin started to run trips. He, fell into like a big time leadership position, and Sean Radley was on the team at that point.
Right.
Sean starts to do like a lot more like meaningful stuff from the office and the organization and operational standpoint. And what I realized is, that took pressure off of me for sure, which helped a lot, because then I could start to like kind of climb up on the balcony and see start to think about big picture stuff a little bit more.
Really kind of grow into that CEO position.
Yeah, try to grow into that role a little bit more. And then what I also realized is that, if you're willing to give up control to the right person, delegate things off properly, give up some of that control, I realized that there's people out there that are way better at doing it than I am, doing whatever that role is than I was. And that's what, that was like right in my face. I was like, holy cow, like, Brendan just totally grew into this leadership position, and Sean just like totally just started to run with the stuff from the office. And that was so cool to see, because it wasn't just, all in Owen's head or on my, little HP laptop.
Yeah. And what you're describing, you might not sort of really realize it or give yourself the credit, but it takes tremendous courage. I've heard some great leaders say that, B's hire C's, and that A's hire A pluses.
Yeah.
And so you being able to recognize not only the need to delegate some of these important organizational functions, but have, to be able to select the people that you recognize could do some of these things better than you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely not easy. And I think it's something that I still, I work on constantly, is to really challenge myself to delegate and give up control. And I read one of the books I really loved was From Good to Great, and he always talked about having the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter where people are sitting, as long as you have the right group of people.
Sure.
And that's like our, that's kind of a big part of our culture, where it's like we just, and within the team from, the early days of like, with the Schultz brothers and Brendan and Sean, and, our culture has grown from there. And I think that, we're always looking for opportunities to give somebody more responsibility when they're ready for it and they want it.
Right.
And I honestly have very rarely ever been disappointed in somebody that takes over responsibility and just, doesn't work out. It very rarely happens. It's just really hard to do.
Yeah. And you guys now, you're swimming in the deep end of the pool with these, sort of world-class trip organizers, outfitters. I mean, how do you kind of view yourselves in that competitive landscape? How do you differentiate and make your pitch against like the back roads of the world and those sorts of big competitors?
Yeah, it was really easy in the beginning because we were kind of we really truly felt like and saw that we were the only ones doing what we were doing with, the kind of that home-based model, that familial, cooking together and
training camp model.
Training camp model. And so, it's in those early days, it felt more like training camp model. Very early on, we realized like, hey, we're a place for professional people that work really hard and value their time off. And with their time off, they want to do something that they love, which is riding their bike, but couple that with a vacation. And so it was our jobs to make that as easy as possible for them, like take care of the details so, they can focus on eating good food, riding their bikes, and I guess like kind of being selfish for a week.
Well, I mean, there's a tremendous appeal to that.
Right.
I mean, to get away. I mean, some of the most rewarding kind of experiences I have now in recreation are the ones that are the most simple.
Right.
And sort of distill life down to their basic functions: sleep, eat, run or ride, and repeat. And a tremendous amount of work goes into creating the situations in which people can actually do that.
Right. It totally does. And I mean, that's what we absolutely love. And so like in the beginning, I think the big players in this space, they were still really into that, like, hey, ride for 5 miles, eat some cheese, drink some wine, ride another 5 miles. And, which is totally fine. Like I love cheese and wine and riding 5 miles, but there was a key. Yeah. There was a segment there that wanted more and they wanted to challenge themselves and then have a soft place to land, like not be forced to ride hard, but we try to create an environment where people can really get exactly what they want out of it. If you just want to cruise for a little while, like that's great. And we're totally there for you. But, if there's a rider that just, wants to get in, the big miles too, like, we have guides and the kind of the structure to make that happen. And so early on, the big players were not catering to that group that actually was like passionate about riding bikes. And they wanted to ride more than 5-10 miles. Yeah. Or train for an Ironman or train for their first. Somebody wanted to go out and train for their first Grand Fondo. They're trying to ride a century. Like where am I going to go to learn about nutrition and some, and how to ride a bike in a group. And then, because I have this event coming up in New York City
right. I'm wondering how that's played out with your culture you're talking about, your employees. I mean, the crew you've collected have all raced at the highest level of their respective disciplines. Folks that have some competitiveness in their wiring. Yeah. Right. Yet you've created these trips that, people can, like you said, have a safe place to land. How's that sort of played into the crafting of these experiences for folks?
That's a great question, because I think if you were to look at, a lot of without a doubt, a lot of our guides and the team staff, they're very accomplished athletes. Yeah. But they're incredibly humble people. And again, above all else, it's about the guest experience. Like that's something that we'll never compromise. And we're not a place for our guides to prove how fast they are, because it's like, if you want to fly up a mountain and show, the group how fast you are, like this isn't the place. Yeah. And so very rarely do we really even, it's like 15th on my list of things to like check in on, maybe a new guide is like if they race or how fast they are or anything like that. Like that's like so low on the totem pole. It's more of like, do they like people? And, do they truly care about, a rider's feelings out there on the road? Do they understand what it feels like to suffer up this hill? Because you're so strong that, when you hit a little rise in the road, it's like you don't notice what the group might notice.
Yeah, what the mere mortals are feeling.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so we work really hard at that. We make sure that that's like what has actually happened is, we find we actually have a lot of these great athletes that are at the cycling house, but they're not there to prove a point. They're there for the guest experience. And I think that, back to your early question, like with, how do we differentiate ourselves? I think that it's our people. It's the team. I really feel like we have like this amazing group of folks that are out there in the world right now doing trips. And I feel like it's hard for me to kind of like toot that horn, but we try to have other guests kind of tell that story.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing that's perfect for word of mouth too, which has got to be powerful in this market.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I mean, yeah, we try to have other people tell our story way more than we tell it, and I think that a lot of the other big players, they've scaled things really, really big.
Yeah, and
it's pretty, which is impressive, one, but also, we have these riders, the team, the staff is out there riding with you, which isn't super common in the industry.
Mostly they have local guides or contract guides.
Yeah, contract guys, or they're just at the next turn in a van.
Oh yeah,
you got
serving
a Garmin.
up the wine and cheese.
It's like, you've got the Garmin and you've got the route. We're out there on the route. We want to maybe take a side road. Very adaptable. Like we love to be adaptable out on the routes, and then food is a big part of what we do, and we really love great food.
Yeah,
and so
it's why a lot of people do these sports so they can eat good food.
Exactly. So. Yeah, but it has been interesting with, to your point, like how do we differentiate ourselves? We've seen those big players, in the early days, like I was saying, like it was a very, serious line between like, that wine cheese 5 miles and what we were doing. That's gotten a lot closer.
Sure.
Because they've realized, because of, the way that the sport's gone and what we've done, I think is really struck a chord with that vacation element, creating a safe place for riders to go out and really, have a wonderful ride and experience an area that, and have that really great support, but put in quite a bit of time in the saddle if you want.
Yeah. So now you guys, I mean, the market's come toward you a little bit in some ways. You sort of have arrived in the sense that your model is sustainable, you're a going concern, you're successful. How do you think about what's the appropriate sort of growth pattern for your business as you sort of transition into that next phase?
I think that above anything, we are always checking in on ourselves to make sure that we're still in line with the experience that our guests expect.
Sure. And
also from the team aspect too, like, do we still love what we do? And that's incredibly important because like if the guides and the chef, the camp director, the leadership on the team, or from our office, if we're not happy and truly still passionate about this, that's going to be felt.
Oh yeah, the guests will feel that instantly.
Everybody feels it. Yeah, totally. Like, people are smart. You cue in on that stuff really, really fast. And so we're checking in on that a lot. And we've gone through, I didn't really know how much was too much growth. In 2013, 2014, we positioned ourselves to really grow quite a bit, put a lot of investment into growth, and we learned a lot during that time. We built in a new CRM system and another new website and all these like really cool projects that came together, but that cost a lot of money.
Yeah,
and new folks coming in and training and all these things. I remember driving. I don't know if you've spent much time in southern Utah, but it kind of off the Kaibab Plateau towards like Flagstaff, Vermilion Cliffs, and it's just like super desolate. And we had gone through like this period of growth for like 18 months, and we were growing a lot. I mean, it was impressive, but I realized that there was something, there was like this undercurrent of just like constant like tension, stress, unhappiness. Like there was just something that just wasn't squaring up.
Yeah.
And
strain.
Yeah, there was like that strain, and that in southern Utah, like that's a wonderful place, and also like a really terrifying place to like do some serious soul searching. It's like there's nothing out there, and I just realized, like, it hit me again like a brick wall. It was like, hey, bigger isn't always better, and it's not. We don't always just have to grow because that's what you're supposed to do as a company,
right?
And as a competitive person, we're surrounded by competitive people, and we want to do well and we want to succeed, and there's like very real metrics there within growth that are like, hey, let's go get that.
Oh yeah.
And but we never broke anything, but there was cracks. We were starting to feel, and maybe I felt it more than most on our team, but
sure.
The key people that were in it every day, like we were starting to feel like, hey, maybe we need to actually not grow. And maybe what we actually did is we spent the next 12, 16 months actually deliberately getting smaller. Because what happened through that big growth period is we were working twice as hard and making really no money. From a business standpoint, it was just like, that's not good. And so, and we really weren't happy doing it. And on a personal level, I wasn't on nearly as many trips as I was before. And so I'd kind of gone completely in the opposite direction, where it was like a lot of office time and a lot more just like managing systems, and
that's not feeding you the way it used to.
And so we kind of had to recalibrate a little bit, and still that growth period was wonderful because, again, we built in a lot of really cool systems, and we learned a lot, got fit. It's almost as like as an athlete, you have to stress yourself quite a bit.
Yeah, it's like super compensation.
Exactly. And so now we understand what that felt like and what that was. And so now we're very deliberate with our growth. And, there's not an exact percentage, but moving forward, we want to do a lot more in Montana. We did our first Montana trip 5 years ago. Sean put it together, and he's like, I think we can do this. And that was like always a pipe dream for me. We started and finished at my folks' place down Mullen Road, which is like awesome. Totally sweet. And so, but we want to do more in Montana, up in Whitefish. We have these like amazing places in Montana. We've got the big parks that are well known, but there's also just these other gems that like we love sharing with people. And so we want to do more of that. That's part of our growth. More of what we know works really well. Like we've got these really wonderful trips in Europe, and obviously Tucson and California, and all over the U.S. and Europe. And then we are rolling out a couple of new trips, like the Dolomites. We're going to be doing the Dolomites first time this year. So, but we're always checking in with ourselves on that growth, because we're kind of past that point of just feeling like we have to grow just because that's what you do. And our structure isn't, we're not like it's not like we're Uber or something where it's like bigger is actually better.
You don't want to be Uber this week. It's
right,
like the worst IPO in history. But that, again, Owen, that takes a tremendous amount of poise and courage and clarity with kind of what you want out of this venture and why you're doing it. I love what you guys are doing, and I love that you're doing it here in Missoula. How can people who are interested in learning more about the Cycling House, where can they find you online, et cetera?
Yeah, we've got a pretty great Instagram feed going on. It's at the Cycling House. The hashtag is #TCH or #Cycling House. Also, our website, it's a pretty great place to learn about what we do. The About Us has a cool little video that kind of tells our story. So yeah, you can check us out there.
Super. Well, Owen, best of luck. Thanks for coming by the podcast. We finally got it done, and look forward to maybe sharing the road sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Justin.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that one. Check out thecyclinghouse.com to learn more about what Owen and the crew are up to next. Okay, coming up next week, we'll learn all about another innovative and cool Montana business. It's a conversation with Erica Mackey and Elke Govertson of My Village, a startup trying to reimagine what childcare is all about. Stay tuned for that episode next week. Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. And we're coming to you from Studio 49, a gift from University of Montana alums Michelle and Lauren Hansen. And remember that A New Angle is supported by CED, Consolidated Electrical Distributors. These guys pretty much sell anything electrical you would ever need, but they also hire a ton of our students. If you want to learn more about jobs at CED, visit cedcareers.com. And before we go, I want to thank some important peeps. Executive producer, Stefan Borsum. Producer, Aidan Morton. And interns, Aspen Runkle and Max Gibson. Huge thanks to VTO, Jeff Ament, and John Wicks for the tunes. And finally, props to Jeff Meese, our master of all things sound. Finally, if you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. Help us spread the word, and be sure to use the hashtag #anewangle when you do. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.